Hello and welcome back to another feedback session that I will be doing here based off of the organic weapon design tutorial that I released 2 years ago, coming up, I guess, on the anniversary of that now. 3 years ago, something like that. So I'll Mack was nice enough here to submit some stuff. One of the recent sort of people who has gone through the tutorial and sort of gotten far enough that he thought it would be good to kind of hit me up for some feedback. And he was generous enough to pass on some iterations, where he's at sort of so far with the sketch, I guess, of this thing here, along with some good reference that he kind of included here. A little bit kind of like low res, but I think I'll be able to work with it, along with some like rabbit stuff here that we'll kind of get into a discussion here pretty quick. So it is, as we can kind of see here, just to kind of like set the kind of baseline foundation for this thing here. He is looking to do this in like a first person kind of view, so my discussion will kind of focus on that. So I'll be pulling a little bit from some of my knowledge on, I guess, Valorant a little bit, along with, I think, so it going into something a little bit of Warframe mixed with first person. So with that in mind, I'll kind of start with like the reference here, or a quick like rundown as to sort of like what he explained to me as well, was that he did start with it being more rabbit based, as we can kind of see in these iterations here, with it being a bit kind of like more decorative with the rabbit form. And that's perfectly fine. I think it did get like a little bit kind of too organic in some of these things here, where it's just kind of like, just becomes like crazy squiggles, where it's like, it becomes how many rabbits can you spot in here? Like, okay, cool, we got like 1, we got 2, we got 3, we got 4, we got 5. Like, it's just like rabbits everywhere. And it just kind of can sometimes sort of like become a little bit overkill in those kinds of situations. Like I do like when it becomes a little bit kind of like more abstracted. Something that I would consider, and I think I did talk about, or I know I did talk about when it came to the like analyzing your reference and stuff like that. That can be very helpful, is kind of abstracting your reference. And if we kind of jump over to the rabbit running thing here. Anyways, let me just say, like, I think it's fine. Like, even though he ends up dropping this kind of rabbit thing here, I think it can be kind of like useful to sort of like analyze some of these kind of things, because I don't think I necessarily went over like how you do this with, say, like a rabbit or something, to kind of think about some of those motion lines, because I think we did it with like vehicles and vases and some more like industrial design objects, and how you would break those down. And it's actually exactly the same kind of thing for this, right? Like, you're looking for sort of lines of motion and sort of it's using cars as the example of sort of like it's already been proofed out for us how this is done. We can kind of like look to that, because some of the weirder examples, you get some vehicles that are designed after a fish or something, or some mostly like, I think the fish one's like a big one. I can't remember. It was like some sort of Chevy, or can't recall exactly, but anyways, they'll just like kind of do like the motion lines of these things here. So like the rabbit, instead of just like actually having like a physical rabbit shape, right? We've got our rabbit. Instead of like looking at this and kind of trying to reproduce that as a gun, we can instead kind of think of it more abstractly. Kind of like this, right? And you can start to see, like, it gives you the idea of speed, potentially, that you can kind of play with. And then translating that back into some of the weapon stuff, you can abstract this and even try to come up with sort of clever ways to include some of the telltale elements of the rabbit, which I think were kind of potentially a missed opportunity here. Of like, if we look at this, the ears are so just like it's like a very clear, like, only rabbits have ears shaped like this, right? Or would have sort of like these kinds of proportions. So this is something like, and they're also at the front of the head. And I think it's like a great opportunity, because it's going to be in first person, to potentially have these be like, funky iron sights, right? Have them be something like that. And having like eyes and that kind of stuff can be like a little bit weird sometimes. So I would say like kind of abstracting that kind of stuff can be like a little bit kind of nice. And we can kind of have it be sort of, you don't have to have it literal, because, you're turning an animal into a gun. So you choose some of these things as to how they would like end up kind of being translated potentially through, or maybe it's like a bit of a flatter back here and then kind of like rounds out there. So you're taking these sort of shapes and you're finding ways to adapt them to the needs and try to like find this like nice middle ground that kind of calls reference to it. Because things like, so you do want to introduce, like I said, it's like some straights in here. Maybe there can be like a bit of a downward slope. And then like it kind of curls back. Let's check out that rabbit again. Okay, so he does have these kind of like curls. Maybe there's like, you know, some guns have some sort of like pull mechanism or grooves kind of here. It could be kind of nice. Where are we? Here, let's just pop this guy out here so we can kind of like take a look at it. And you can potentially play with this, you know. And find like a way to abstract it potentially. Oopsie, I'm doing it all in one layer here. That's not great. But like abstracting it in such a way that it has like the essence of like what we're kind of seeing here for like the flow of the rabbit, rather than kind of turning into an actual just like full on rabbit. And I think I might be doing like another tutorial at some point here in the future potentially, discussing that kind of stuff, because I think that's kind of like really important to kind of go on and just to kind of dip our toes into that a little bit. I did grab like a couple of examples from existing IPs that we can kind of just like really quickly look at in order to just like get an idea as to what I mean by that. Or like the kind of two different sort of like options you kind of have to go for here. And I think it's going to be like very obvious very quickly what looks better and what feels like a little bit less believable as far as like a good design. So I got one of like Brandon's concepts here from Apex Legends, and he's not necessarily guilty of this himself, but I think it's just sort of like this is how Apex does their guns, where he has like a weapon here where it kind of just, you know, you've got like a complex kind of like relief or something on the side of the gun. So like the side view of the gun looks pretty sick, but it ends up being just kind of like a flattened sort of form projected onto the side of it, and has like no like dimension or anything, and there's no sort of volumes to this stuff here, which it kind of implies it does. Well, like on the flip side of that, we have Adrian's gun here from Destiny 2, where, you know, we've got these like the rats are a relief, but they're not sort of like a core focal element. We see some nice sort of like hits of them kind of going down the sides of the gun here, but we have this like really nice big focal point of the rat skull in 1P, which is freaking awesome, and gives you like really sells this idea of the gun. And overall, I mean, you've also got this like nice sort of sculpted versus unsculpted. I'm not really sure where the the katana kind of wrapping is coming in here, but you know, whatever. Let's not get too deep into that. It looks cool, so sometimes that's good enough. But yeah, so this is like kind of something kind of really interesting to kind of think about, how you can kind of give an actual sort of like, you know, this does have like that similar kind of relief that we see here, right? Of typical kind of like Greek sculpture or something like that on the side of a wall. But it's like paired with sort of like a nice, very dimensional object, right? This like a very kind of, especially for first person games. And you see me do this in on Valorant with like the Oni skin line and stuff like that, where, you know, you've got like that big sort of like Oni mask, right? This is doing the same kind of thing. Or it's like a very kind of like easy thing to pull on. So you have a nice sort of big read in first person, and you're not just sort of kind of relying on the side view to carry an object. So it has this combination of both the side view and the first person view are working together to create a very interesting first person view, right? Or, you know, a very interesting kind of like design to the weapon. So you're not just like, this looks cool here, but like, oh no, what happened here? But yeah, I might go into like more detail on that in the future when it comes to that kind of thing. So jumping back to some of this stuff here. Oh, let's not worry about that guy yet. Yeah, I definitely think there's like some opportunity to like simplify some of the stuff here and play with some of these. Sorry, I'm painting on the main layer again here. Play with some of these shapes here potentially. Maybe the ears. This might be something to experiment with on like an option. Could be kind of neat. potentially, and not worry about the ears being like too big of a thing here. Kind of turns into a weird hammerhead thing, so maybe not that. But that could be kind of like neat, maybe, or like kind of like maybe this is coming down, sort of like what you had, and so we can still kind of have that. But I would say like lose stuff like the eye and like start to abstract some non-important parts. But I'm also kind of like pretty on the fence about having sort of a very directional weapon where like the object or the thing that's represented is like facing forward, because what happens is if you end up kind of taking the route of like what Adrian did here, especially if you're just like relying on the single object here, like if this is just like a whole bunch of rats and we didn't have this, but there was like a 3-dimensional rat in the first person that was also kind of facing this way, we would like literally be looking at like a rat's butt, right? Which isn't like super cool. So we probably don't want to do that. And so this is where it's like having multiple sort of like elements here can be kind of nice to have, right? And same thing here, right? Like even if we where'd that rabbit go? Like even if we include like the tail there for like this is sort of like hammer or something, it's like even that like may not be the most sort of like compelling thing of like you're looking at the butt of something. And this is something that even like on Valorant and I don't think there's so much of an issue on Warframe, but like, you've really got to be considerate of like what is going on in this area here, right? Does it look a little bit kind of sus or sort of like a little bit kind of strange sometimes? So yeah, I think it's like something kind of important to kind of keep in mind. So that's where it's like potentially abstracting some of these shapes and kind of having it be like a lot more abstracted than you might actually think. And relying more on these like lines of motion to drive the sort of the feeling of something, the feeling of speed, right? Because that's where going back to these things here, right? Having that sort of like if it's like based on a rabbit, you want like speed in there too, or like forward momentum. Can be very helpful to think about when it comes to that kind of stuff. So including that, I think, in this sort of ideation, I think could be very good. And generally, just like I think like some of the more successful ones, I think are kind of like ones like this. I do think you can kind of push the silhouettes on them a little bit more. Like you do have, I think, if we kind of pull out the reference here a little bit, you've got this kind of cool exposed engine on an airplane. And I think there's some interesting opportunities for you to kind of like punch out some of these shapes in here, to kind of have that feel like a little bit more dimensional, right? Maybe purple on gray isn't the best here for this. But also something that like we see quite a bit in these other guns here is that there's like a nice sort of feeling of cohesion to it. So something that I start to see, especially as we kind of get into the base weapon here, or like into your kind of like more finalized design, is, oh shoot, it's stuck there. Is that there's like some core sort of elements that are just kind of like they're only appearing in one sort of spot, and I like what you're doing like on the handles or like the triggers, like that, those kind of like sort of manipulatable object type things. They do have sort of like they appear as consistent material kind of callouts, which is quite nice to have. And I think like similarly, I think like some of this stuff here could either appear in other ways or appear in other places, or just potentially flow better to take up a better sort of space. Because we'll also see that in areas like here and here, right? Another thing to think about is like these are two very kind of like similarly even kind of like distributions for this, where we have this kind of intricate element here, or ornamental intricate element, followed by an intricate machined area that's also the same sort of like spatial kind of section there. So I would be kind of cognizant of that. Personally, I would do something probably going more like this, likely. Kind of really having it kind of fill out that space. And then you've kind of got this nice sort of ability to, come on, give me a darker color here. Do something like this or whatever with the shapes, right? Because another thing to really think about for first-person guns is perspective kind of really factors into this quite a bit. So not only do you, like if I was to kind of extend this over here a little bit. If this gun was going to be in, say, first person, you know, it's kind of a little bit like the Uzi looking gun from Valorant or whatever, that you end up with like the gun kind of doing something like, right? Like your gun's like this. And so this whole section here ends up becoming like this, right? It gets really crushed in perspective. And so if we have this kind of like really shrunk up here like that, it ends up becoming like a very kind of like micro-y kind of area, which is like something that you really want to kind of consider and think about. Like I said, I'm going to probably plan to go into some of this kind of stuff in the future, as I think it is kind of like really kind of interesting, and we'll give some sort of insight into sort of like the work I get to do on Valorant and what we get to really think about when it comes to designing weapons, and where we want to like really sort of like draw a player's eye to specific areas to kind of like really make the best use of space. And I think I've kind of probably found some like good examples that sort of like help sell that kind of thing. So yeah, generally I think like, you know, bringing a bit more of this kind of machine stuff to here, being careful with your shapes. I think there's a lot of good examples of weapons out there that they'll do this kind of like downward motion like this. And this can often kind of like make something feel like a little bit kind of saggy or like droopy in first person. Like if I if I go back over here to the first person, and if we've got our gun, here's our gun. But all of a sudden, like if I had, pardon me, if this gun was actually doing something more like this, you know, in first person, this can sometimes make it feel like that the gun is like a sad gun and is like bloop, kind of drooping down. So that can sometimes be counteracted by some of these other sort of shapes that are sort of like rounding around them and stuff like that. But I think it's something very important to kind of consider. So definitely think about that when it comes to these types of things. Sorry, I'm like jumping around a little bit here. I do like sort of all this sort of like this call outs to sort of thinking about sort of the functionality of these things here. I wouldn't get kind of like too into the weeds when it comes to like reload and stuff like that. I've got like a bunch of examples on like simple breakdowns online that I think could be like very handy as far as like talking about or like showcasing from a development side of things, like how clearly you can break down the function of something for like animation and rigging and that kind of thing. Sorry, I'm trying to load up my site here and it is apparently going extremely slow. Weird. We'll come back to that later. But yeah, so I think you can do like very simplified breakdowns, and I think this is going to also come down to sort of like being very clear about what you want to do, as far as like rather not what you want to do, but like what you want to show or need to show. So doing sort of, I guess these are just the side views tilted with the hands and that kind of thing. That can be extremely useful. But even just doing like very, very simple breakdowns, like here we go. Here's a good example. Copy image. So like a very sort of simple breakdown from like a side view showing like how the functions of these things sort of work. Like if you really want to get like super complex, you certainly can kind of get in there and show like how the hand is going to like manipulate with some of these things here. I don't think there's anything like particularly special being told to us or informing the viewer when it comes to this kind of stuff here. So I don't know if it's like worth your time kind of like showcasing this kind of stuff. So I would kind of consider that potentially. But I think there's like a pretty good amount of like variety in these things here. You're kind of turning some of these into sort of like some weird front loading like automatic pistol. You can see some of these are kind of making some weird shapes. The rabbit is like collapsing over. Yeah. So definitely some stuff to kind of consider when it comes to some of these shape designs. But so like, yeah, your variety is here, but I think you can still like push the shape because what I always do is kind of like zoom all the way out, and at a glance from like if I just turn these into silhouettes, do these actually read like significantly different? Some of them do. Some of them have some neat stuff. This one's pretty neat. Like these guys, yeah, they're pretty different. Okay, yeah, some of these shapes, there's some differences, but I think there's like some more significant differences you can push on the top and elsewhere for some of this stuff here. So I would definitely kind of keep that sort of thing in mind. All right. And okay, now I'll just get into like some of the general construction as we kind of like shift over to this. We're going to do all of this. Okay. And so something that I really kind of like to think about for a lot of this is always, and I think it becomes very apparent when we kind of like look at this view here, is really thinking about sort of how these various shapes are interacting. And I think there's a somewhat, not a lack of consideration, but I think there could be like better consideration as far as like how your various forms are interacting, right? Like this top thing is like literally just a cylinder, which isn't the most compelling. But I think more importantly, it's like, okay, if you're going to have this like rabbit form, or even if we jump over here and we have like this sort of like curved form going around it, what we really want to see within the games industry and just like in design in general is have a very good clarity as far as like how are these shapes physically interacting with each other. So if we have, let's open this guy up over here again for funsies. If we have sort of the cylindrical form going down the length of the gun, and this thing here is wrapping up, we're going to want to see this thing, you know, I'll kind of like look at it from a front view here. We're going to want to see it kind of like wrapping around like this. So I'm just like trying to guess what is going on here. And this is like stuff that will become like very apparent when you're going to be doing this in 3D, right? Because I think it's like still the goal is like, not saying Brandon's done anything wrong here, but the goal is to avoid the pancaking, right? That's what I end up like calling this guy the pancake effect. So you want to like really think about the physicality of how these things are going to wrap around like this to kind of create that nice physical interaction of the form, right? Because once you start doing these 3/4 views, you're like, okay, well, this is actually like physically come out like this, like that. Does this kind of like, is there like, or is it like rounded in some way here? Is there like some physical mass to this? So you really kind of almost like want to feel through some of these things. And this is something we'll have our like vendors and sometimes we used to ask them to do this every now and again. It's like, give us like a wireframe or something, right? Like we don't necessarily believe you have like an understanding of the shapes you're creating. So, you know, figure out a wireframe of the form and does it like physically make sense and how the way it like interacts with shapes. And that's like a really good way to sort of like test some of this stuff. Sorry, this is like making a weird corn dog type shape here. So yeah, I think that's like very, very kind of important to kind of consider. And I think you're doing a good job at sort of like showcasing some of that here, like how these shapes sort of like wrap around and such. But I think you can push it like a little bit more and really kind of always consider, like Alex Senecal did like a really good kind of chat on this in his like visual design tutorials, is like always be like looking for these like awkward 50-50 kind of splits. And when it comes to this type of stuff, you know, just like always be looking for that opportunity to find the straights or like create a straight to give sort of that manufactured rigidity to things. Because otherwise what's going to happen is, you know, it becomes this giant like, ooh, like noodly shape, right? That just like the noodle never ends. And if you want something to have a feeling of like speed and elegance, right? I mean, there's a difference like soft and elegant, like, you know, elegant you usually have like there's some like length, but also it's like, you know, something straightens out. If it's just like this isn't elegant, right? Elegant, you've got like a long drawn out, and that can often be like a straight, or it can be like a soft kind of curve to it. But that can kind of, the curve can kind of almost like, that can kind of read as a straight almost, or some sort of like a controlled manufactured line. And so having very even S curves, even like this isn't elegant, this is elegant, right? So, you know, having that kind of contrast in there can kind of help quite a bit. So like in areas like here, I would be like, okay, cool, let's and also I think it's like very important to kind of really think about the physicality of these shapes and how they're like physically interacting with the surface. Sorry, I'm doing like real chunky lines here to kind of show a point. And you're gonna start to see that like by me kind of, sorry, I'm trying to resist rotating the canvas here because it's gonna like really make things confusing. We're gonna see that like we're introducing with like a little bit of unevenness of just like this or like this versus this is kind of making it a little bit more interesting, right? And softening out some of these shapes, or kind of not softening, but kind of like simplifying some of them, or finding like clever ways to actually, yeah, that kind of works. Yeah, and also be careful how much room you're giving for like the fingers and that kind of stuff, right? Oh yeah. And actually one thing before I kind of carry on with this, something I would consider is like really think about how a character's going to hold this thing. Like if I overlay a hand, excuse me, I'm not an anatomy expert here, but if I overlay a hand here and I start, okay, we have our like finger, which is barely room to get into this trigger area, trigger guard zone. But then we've got this like curvature here where like the hand is doing like this, right? And don't worry, I've actually done this before. Way back in the day on Warframe. I think this is when it actually went into production for this guy here. And this actually became hilarious because they had to like, I think they designed it and like the character's hand, like because they're just like a single rigged element like this, would just like, it just broke. It would actually have the gun like crashing through the hand. It was pretty hilarious. So I can't remember if they actually changed it, but this was like a lesson learned that I would never do this again. Unless you have, and also it's just like, it's not comfortable, right? If you've got like your hand going like here to like bending that way, like if you just try and like position your fingers in that way, it's just like, it's not comfortable. So often that's why we stick to that kind of like that base gun shape like this, right? Core thing. So you're able to sort of like easily hold on to that kind of an area. So it's definitely something to consider when it comes to that kind of stuff. So, and also, you know, it helps if we kind of, I don't think we necessarily need this kind of like complex form here. So you could kind of come back in here. Let's do a little bit of this. Doing some of this kind of thing to sort of potentially even it out. Actually, let's have that flow through maybe. There we go. It's not perfect, but you know, you get the idea. It's just to open that space up a little bit more. We can definitely kind of like play with this so it does have like a little bit of that kind of going on. You know? Something that we'd use a lot in Warframe was this kind of shape here. You'll see us use it a lot. Or even like where it kind of curves like a C shape a little bit back into itself. So that can be kind of like nice to have quite a bit and have unevenness. Kind of makes something feel like a little bit more interesting. So you can have sort of shapes doing like that. I'd have the thumb area maybe like a little bit kind of like bigger here. Yeah, I think it's interesting. You are doing kind of like a neat sort of spot for like interesting sort of shapes with like the first person. I think you could be careful in some of the spot here. Like I always kind of recommend this. Like you either go full orthographic or make it kind of like weird perspective. But often like for side views is like if something's rounded, right, and an orthographic, we can like very easily, you know, okay, yeah, here it is like rounded. Just give it like a highlight going like here, and it's gonna represent it's like rounded, right? So, or even like the shapes of these things here are going to sort of like imply that it's rounded. So I don't think you necessarily have to imply like with the curving of these that something's rounded. I'd keep it nice and straight unless it actually is bent like that. But like what you could do here is probably have some of this stuff kind of come forward like so, and then actually have some of this engine stuff. I would recommend actually having it kind of come into the first person view, right? And some of this, like, I don't think you necessarily have to worry about. Like, we'll actually make this exception sometimes on Warframe. Oh, sorry, not Warframe. We did this on Warframe, but also on Valorant too, where we're just like, yeah, you know what? An ejection port doesn't really work with this design, and we'll just like goodbye, remove it. And it's just like it doesn't eject anything. It's just like shooting magic bullets or whatever. So we can kind of like get away with that. But I think it's like important to like really think about once we kind of do this sort of thing is like, okay, how is this thing like physically interacting with the surfaces? Are the surfaces like touching each other or impacting one another, right? Is this kind of these pipes kind of are they going into the surface in some way? Are they interacting with it? And that's like where the physicality of a thing is going to become like very interesting and potentially quite fun to explore. It's like going down here. Maybe this thing is like. Maybe it's asymmetrical. Potentially, this could be kind of neat. Maybe. And then there's like some neat sort of like indentation or something here. You always have this kind of crap in Warframe. It's sinking into the surface potentially. And then you can kind of use like a little bit of highlight to kind of like show that the physical surface is changing in some way. Some shadows and that kind of thing. Let's check on that. Let's check on that rabbit real quick here. Turn off this thing just so I can kind of see the shape. Okay. So we do have like a physical form that we can kind of maybe play with, even if we're not referencing the rabbit. Maybe it's like that might be like too on the nose, but you know, who knows? Sometimes on the nose works, right? And I just like keep in mind your materials that you're using here. Like you don't want to have like too many. If you're jumping back to this old example of the Warframe stuff, you'll notice I keep the materials like pretty limited, right? You know, like wood, metal, organic stuff, metal, shell, metal, right? And so it's not getting like too all over the place when it comes to things. So that could be kind of like very helpful. And those are like really old concepts. Like I kind of hate those. I'm not a huge fan of them. They've got a lot wrong with them. So they're more of like a good example of like, you know, when things don't work out or when they're, you know, mistakes were made and I kind of like learned from them. So that could be kind of like helpful to kind of look back on some of that older stuff, right? Right. So, you know, let's grab our rabbit. Just have that kind of curvature at the front. So we can kind of play with that a little bit here. Could echo some of the shapes, right? Could be kind of helpful to kind of work with the forms here a little bit. Could maybe have this guy echo that guy as well. Kind of depends how far you want to go with these types of things here. Yeah, and then just being careful of like getting too overly complex with some of this stuff. Like I think, I'd actually kind of simplify some of this. Like this complexity is still kind of bothering me a little bit. I'm not really sure what's happening here. I guess it's a hollow area, but yeah, I would kind of like, all right, if you want to have this come down, there we go. I'd really like to think proportionally. You know, it's like, okay, I've got like, say, 20% gray or rubber, and it's like 40% or like 80% other stuff, or like 75, 70%, and then 10% kind of like orange pop out kind of color. So you have that like 1, 2, 3 kind of primary, secondary, tertiary kind of like breakups for some of this stuff here, which can kind of feel kind of good. So yeah, this can be kind of nice. And like just being like really cognizant of like where you put your details and that kind of thing, right? It's like if I was going to have some sort of like detail focal point here, it would be like here I'd have some cool like element sort of in here, maybe, you know, so that you're going to get like a really, really neat first person view for this area here, and like some nice long sort of speed lines that kind of go down the center of it. Kind of makes it look like a little bit like a pig. But you know, this is where it's like you want to try to sort of like sort out some of these things. So maybe the ear doesn't work. Maybe it's silly. Maybe we can just go back to the I mean, maybe just be like real subtle, right? Depends where you want to take this. So yeah, that kind of stuff can be like super helpful when it comes to these types of things. I do like the indications of manufacturing. Careful like how complex some of these frame forms get, right? Like I'd rather kind of just like circle, like kind of go around here, pinch, and have almost like a cutout. You can do something like a little bit complex here, but you know, once again, if we kind of undo this, it's very like 1, 2, 1, 2, like it's very like even in its width. So experiment with different sort of widths of these things if possible. And then like really considering like if you have your magazine here, like here, let's copy paste your magazine really fast. Oh shoot. You go away. All right, so we got your magazine. Like if I were to like lay this over top of it, does it like physically fit in here? Does it like feel like there's enough sort of like space? Where the magazine's going in, does it make sense? Like if you did have a bullet ejector or something for it to kind of interact with it, does it make sense for that? Like it feels like it would kind of come in contact or be able to shoot stuff that way. Yeah, that kind of stuff can be like very important to think about. Otherwise, so yeah, and also it's like you have a big hit of like detail down here. So I would opt to like simplify that and have like little detail like that, or it's like gray, or mostly like this kind of color poking out, like that. Something like that could be kind of nice. Some of this stuff you could like do a little bit of like yin and yang type shapes. Could be kind of neat to play with. More indications of manufacturing, right? Like you're going from like thick to thin. I think like what you might be noticing here is like kind of starts to feel like a little bit kind of like blobby if you look at the individual forms, right? And so when you start introducing some of these like straights and breakups, it can kind of feel like quite nice. And you might even want to like, you know, this starts to become like a single big piece. Maybe break it. Or, you know, maybe there's like a cut line that kind of comes through here. Let's see, something like that, or right? It can start to make it feel like a little bit more manufactured and kind of interesting that way. And I don't know, you can go like a little bit more kind of abstracted with this kind of stuff. Like you can have it be feeling a little bit more organic. Warframe does have that organically kind of like look to it, which can be nice. And so like, yeah, having these sort of like cut line type things can be like so handy when it comes to implying some sort of complexity. Like those are like final touches I kind of added on the sketch for the tutorial, but I think implying these kind of like early on can be like super helpful. Maybe this goes like that, and then you've kind of got your metal thing. Maybe there's like a little hit of orange in here. And then like this kind of creates like a really interesting sort of thing you can play with to kind of have the player focus on. And these things here are serving more as supports. supporting elements to the focal point, right? Of you trying to sell the machine bit. Like maybe you have like a little hit of greebles in there or whatever. To try to sell that. Yeah. And then along like edges, you could kind of make it feel like potentially a little bit more organic. Maybe this thing is like doing that. Maybe this is doing the same, kind of like an interesting like framing form. Right? It starts to kind of turn it into a more kind of like interesting kind of gun, maybe. Maybe this has like a top bottom thing. I don't know. Yeah. So I'm not saying you have to necessarily do exactly this as like a solution for this thing here, but some like minor things to kind of think about, because I want it to be like, you know, small, compact. If we do want to kind of go the route of it being, you know, something related to like Warframe, really kind of thinking about the physical kind of interactions of some of these shapes here, right? So like if I was like thinking the physicality of how this form here is interacting, this form is interacting with this form, maybe this kind of like comes down and there's like a lip I can kind of like imply here, or like this is like kind of like lipping out. So there's like some interesting kind of like physical forms you're playing with. You're doing it here, which is nice. I like that. I just think there could be like a little bit more kind of consideration when it comes to these types of things. Because you really want to think about how these different shapes are physically colliding and interacting with each other in interesting ways. Yeah. Might be getting a bit complex in the top there, but it could be simplified if you wanted to. But yeah, and you're also seeing like, you know, the shapes getting a little bit kind of like more interesting here, I think. You could even bring back some of these like these forms if you wanted to. Not really sure how that transition doesn't look great. But you know, we could figure something out. Oh, that's not bad. There we go. Yeah, something kind of happening there. Yeah. And a lot of this you can kind of just like hide in like sort of like techno-organic kind of like babble stuff. Do a lot of this, it's just like the detailing of just thinking of kind of cool framing shapes for the, like I said, like going back to the kind of the, yeah, I would simplify this trigger quite a bit. You know, someone's got to shoot this gun, right? So like give it a little bit more room, give it like a little bit of simplicity there. Yeah. And open it up just like a touch more. There we go. And kind of instead of turning it into a circle shape, make it like a little bit more oval. Like an egg. Could be kind of nice too. Bullets are neat. Yeah, I'd be careful because like the moment you start going into some of this like really rigid, almost like 45s, kind of almost like ceiling beams or kind of V frame type of manufacturing, it feels like it loses that kind of organic type feel. So I would potentially avoid that. I don't think you necessarily need them. I don't think there's any benefit to it. You could just like, you know, maybe there's like a skinny one kind of going down along here or whatever. And then you just don't worry about it. It being held in magically or something. Could potentially be kind of nice for some of that stuff. And I always like to think about, like I said, the layering is like super important. You'll notice that I'm kind of like, you're kind of doing it a little bit here and there, like a touch here, a little bit there. But I think it's important to kind of consider if I do a cutaway view of this thing on the side. Where is this guy? All right, let's get rid of you. I said you. That we'd have like the blue as like, we just think of this like layer wise. Okay, you got like blue. Then you've got like techno organic junk as like a cutaway, like is underneath it. So you've always got this like 1-2 sort of like layering type of feel, and considering the way that like these things, oh yeah, maybe, and then orange kind of like bridges the gap between the two, right? Maybe it can kind of like pop out like that, right? or is it in between it? It's like sunken in a little bit down. So it just has like a little bit of that. Or has like a blue, bit of gray, sort of like as a transition, and then orange. Something like that. So you're thinking about like how these materials are physically interacting, and I would do that quite a bit whenever I work on weapons and that kind of thing. Is like always considering how what the rules I've kind of created for the various material types and like layering of those materials. So another thing you can kind of consider beyond this is like, okay, what are sort of the connector parts? Like when two parts come together, is it like, we'll call this flesh for lack of a better term, like flesh on flesh, or is it sort of like machine, like this gray stuff, we'll call this the machine stuff, like machine on machine, right? So is it kind of going to be more like this, of like agreeable sort of like type thing like this? Or is there sort of like a cover going around this thing for some reason? Right. And if we look at what I've done for the tutorial here, for both of them, like, let me just grab this guy here as the side view of it. Let's pack up this rabbit and get over there. If we look at this for this thing, right, we've got metal goes inside. And I actually took the time to like render out like the inside of this thing as much as possible, so it feels like, you know, oh, these two things go together, or I negatived it out. And same thing for the other guy too. I don't think I actually like called that out or highlighted it, but it was sort of like in the model, and you know, it's something that if you really wanted to kind of do something like that, you could. Oh wait, never mind. There's no magazine on the other one. Yeah. So. Yeah, I do consider this of just like how parts will come together, right? And I think that can be kind of nice. So, and another thing that you'll notice on this thing here that I think could be very helpful to think about, and you'll notice I was thinking about it at a pretty early stage for a lot of these, in particular for, actually I can just paste this guy here, for like this stage here is like the light greebles. So kind of coming in here with just like a generic light of some sort. And this is what's like, this is going to satisfy the sci-fi, all right? This is going to sound silly, but like little lights make something feel sci-fi, all right? So, you know, throw some little like lights in here, throw a light in there, and instantly feel sci-fi. It's silly, but it's true. So, you know, compact. So I'll just kind of go through the list of your pillars and how you can kind of like potentially think about making these feel like making this like gun feel aligned to your pillars. So like small, compact. I think you're doing a pretty good job at that. Compact, I think you could probably like, I mean, it's a relatively small weapon, so you want to keep your shapes like a little bit kind of the simpler side, I'd say, is a possibility. So you could start to maybe kind of come in here and like, if some were getting too complex, like say here, we could kind of come in and maybe simplify them a little bit to kind of make it give that sort of like smaller feel, right? If it's like simpler, it's going to feel smaller or like more compact potentially. That can sometimes help that kind of feeling a little bit. Maybe. But I mean, it's already sort of a relatively small weapon, so you might be okay on that front. We're kind of like reducing some of the clutter on it. Right. So I'm just like still noodling away on this. For some of these other guys here, I kind of like if there's like just a whole bottom of this. There we go. Yeah, that feels pretty good. So yeah, small, compact, I think it's pretty easy. Fast, functional, I think that's where you're going to want to have like these sort of like the speed forms, right? If you look at fast cars, they're always like whoosh. They got the whoosh. They got the speed, right, going forward. Being careful of like the sags. So like if you can have some like speed lines, or it kind of goes like this or this, but definitely some or like this to kind of drive the eye forward when we're in that first person view. To kind of, you know, there's the reticle to kind of like drive the eye towards that thing, right? With some curves to kind of emphasize that sort of like point earlier on, like here, but I'd be careful of having them sort of like sag too much or kind of like droop, especially like around this like area here. So this is a bit of a danger one. Oh, come on. Right here, I'd be aware of it. Something to think about. So, right, if it kind of goes like this, that starts to make it feel fast. So something to think about for that. Soft and elegant. We kind of talked about that already. Think about how you can kind of swoop and kind of also go into these straights. Think about how you want to balance soft with a feeling of manufacturing. I think that could be like very, very useful. And I would do that in a lot of these, right? Like going back into these, soft, soft, straight, soft, straight, right? Those straights give us that feeling of like the smooth elegance, right? So it's not just like, I mean, okay, this one is maybe an outlier, like a couple of these where it does go like, woo, Noodle Town. But you do have these sort of like the curves balanced with a straight, right? That's an S curve. It's an unbalanced S curve where it's like tight, big, straight, straight, angle, organic, straight, organic. So balancing those things out. So it's not just all one thing, okay? So just like kind of turning this on and off here. Let's flatten noise down. You start to see how it's like it's starting to sort of like sell that sort of like the elegant sort of vibe, right? Elegance is still with simplicity. And so that's where it's going to come down to the silhouette is going to be important to kind of like nail down. And so some of these like more textural things like this, you might want to kind of like lose because it's going to kind of like fight the elegant vibe, right? You're going to want nice and sleek shapes when possible. So as we're having these like nice long ones is going to help you. Advanced sci-fi, we talked about that. You know, we're doing sort of like weird techno-organic sci-fi. So, you know, little mesh, like really thinking about how these things are like coming together. Are they like mushing into, or like not mushing, but like fusing into each other in like an interesting kind of like way? I think what was the example I have of the base here? If I kind of jump back. Turn this off. Yeah, having that kind of like, you know, this kind of stuff here, right? Do these things fuse in an interesting kind of like way? Is going to kind of like make it feel like a little bit more techno-organic in that sort of sense and advanced sci-fi. And the decorative, I mean, that can kind of come at the end potentially, whether it be sort of like in the... you know, the detailing, the simple sort of like elements. If you've got like a specific example, if we jump over to your reference here of some of the more like intricate detailing, like this stuff here, I think you were experimenting with that a little bit. Like some of these, like with this relief stuff is kind of neat. I think that kind of stuff is cool. Like I said, I'd be kind of wary of just like literally having like rabbits running down the side or like a giant squishy melty rabbit here. But I think there's like some interesting kind of like reliefs or insinuations of that kind of stuff you can kind of like play with. That can be kind of neat. Because I think some of them are kind of cool. You know, you could have sort of like a neat sort of like it's hard to make it not look like a rat. A simplified sort of like rabbit form. Or if you wanted to like make it feel like fast, you could kind of like throw some rabbits or something in there. Or it could be just like a matter of just like some cool shapes or something kind of going along there. And they can kind of appear in various areas here, that sort of decorative shape stuff. Within like a specific kind of like shape pattern. It's like giving yourself like a pocket to kind of like work within. Could be kind of nice. So it's not like too abstract or too mushy, but has like, is kind of contained in some sort of way and helps reinforce that, the directional sense, right? Like works with the surrounding forms to help sell it. Yeah, so that's kind of all I got on this. Hopefully that was helpful. Kind of rambled for a good 54 minutes there. I don't think I've got too much to sort of edit out here, but yeah. So turning this on and off, maybe it's a bit better. I don't know. But just like some of my sort of thoughts on that. Another thing probably would want to do here is maybe adjust the... Let's see here. Whoa. Uh-oh. Open up another screen here. Maybe adjust the angles of certain things so they start to align a little bit more. Right? It starts to make it feel like a little bit faster, right? So we have like this kind of stuff happening, right? Ooh, that, right? And you can start to further reinforce some of those shapes, right? Because that's where like that small, compact, and like fast, elegant, sort of like simple sort of shapes is going to kind of come in. And you could also like, once again, further reinforce that with like some of the edging. Like maybe this has an actual sort of like hard edge that kind of comes through here. And then you can kind of like, wait a sec, reinforce that with some of these like forms. Right? That's kind of fun. And then maybe this cut line could be like a little bit more interesting to help reflect that. Why isn't this working? There we go. So this goes down. Sorry, just like testing something here. Yeah, and then you can kind of like have some of these shapes feel like a little bit more kind of interesting, like they're kind of like working around these edges. All right. Maybe too organic, not sure. But yeah, so that could be kind of like fun to potentially play with like the simple shading to kind of help reinforce some of these shapes. Yeah, so hope that's helpful. Like I said, you could kind of like make these a little bit more simplified, maybe not go too organic. It's a delicate balance, so it doesn't turn into sort of just like a giant like meat popsicle gun, just like literally just like looking too fleshy. Yeah, so I hope that's helpful. Thanks for doing the tutorial. Hopefully you found it useful and learned some things, and hopefully this feedback was helpful. I will put some discount codes up for the two-year, I think, maybe 2-3. I can't even remember. Anniversary of this guy here, and if anyone wants to check it out, feel free. And yeah, thanks so much for doing the tutorial, and I really appreciate your support. All right, hopefully see you guys in chat in the future. Okay, bye.